Lastly, but not the least, we have Anna Lipsanen. She's a colleague of mine. She's a researcher at the Finnish Environment Institute, SYKE. She's an environmental social scientist and working on her PhD on scenarios and socio-economic pathways. So over to you, Anna.
Hi, everyone, and greetings from dark and rather cold Helsinki. As many of you know, the Nordics might not be the best place to be in November, but that's how it is. But yeah, as Ville-Veikko said, my name is Anna Lipsanen, and I work as a researcher in the Climate Policies and Risks Group at the Finnish Environment Institute. And today I will be presenting our work on future pathways for Arctic fires that both me and especially my colleagues also present at the webinar here have been working on. And I think that Johan's presentation gave a very good that's a great transition to our presentation, which is more on the human aspect of these wildfires in the Arctic, and especially from a socioeconomic point of view. But here you can see the content of my talk. So first I will give you a very brief background of our work, and then jump directly to the 3 Arctic fire pathways that we've developed. We got this, let it burn, and the fire will come. And details of those to follow very shortly. And then I will finalize by giving some brief recommendations and next steps. So we've already, even today, heard a lot on fires in the Arctic, but here's a very brief background also to our work. So as we know and have learned today even more, that the wildland fires in the Arctic are expected to become more frequent and more severe in the future due to climate change. There's also an increasing need for data on fires in the Arctic, and especially there is a lack of region-specific fire emission pathways and scenarios for the Arctic and nearby boreal ecosystems. To this end, our project technical report, Arctic Fires, the present estimates and future pathways, tries to contribute by supporting the creation of these emission scenarios. And our technical report consists of 2 parts. The first half of the report looks at the fire monitoring and reporting systems that include, for instance, comparing official fire inventories and independent satellite-based estimates, as well as giving suggestions for standardized fire size classification. But more importantly for this talk today, we also have presented pathways of how will the emissions from wildfires and agricultural waste burning develop in the future, especially when you include some of the key human-induced factors. So what are these mysterious pathways then that we've developed? We know this rather certainly already by now, so that climate change will increase both fire activity and fire risk in the Arctic. And this is also our underlying assumption throughout all the pathways. This, for instance, increases lightning and drier conditions in the area, gives longer fire seasons, as well as thawing permafrost, plus there are transitions to grasslands, advancing tree line and dry peat. And as Johan just previously pointed out, human activity is actually the main cause for the fires in many places. And we see that there's more human-caused ignitions related to tourism and, for instance, resource and energy extraction. Some other common developments that affect wildfires in the Arctic is, for instance, the expansion of agricultural activities further north. So with this background in mind, and to assess the impacts of human activity, we have created both a low and high fire activity and risk pathway. We got this is the title for the low risk pathway, and let it burn for the high one. And we also have developed regional best guess pathways for Arctic Council member states, including Russia here, although of course comprehensive local data for Russia is lacking, and of course we all know that the situation is very difficult at the moment and continues to be so most likely. In this approach, we got this and let it burn pathways consider the Arctic and boreal region as a whole, whereas the fire will come, the best guess fire pathway is actually country specific. Our timescale in the pathways is up to 2050, and the descriptions are based on expert judgment and relevant literature that we could find, even though that is rather sparse still at the moment. So let's look at these pathways in a bit more in detail. So first we got this, which is the lowest fire activity and fire risk pathway. And here the fire risks are reduced or even prevented, and wildland fires are tackled and fought efficiently. This results in a lower number of wildland and human-caused fires in the boreal, with smaller burned areas compared to other pathways. However, climate impacts will still increase fire activity and risk in the Arctic region. And thus, while some of the fire risk and fire activity can be abated, it cannot be completely abated due to climate change. Also, in our report, we have actually divided these human-induced factors, of which you can see some examples here, into 4 relevant categories. And I will now walk you through the categories that we've selected in a bit more detail using these examples. So first we have the demographics category that deals with population and urbanization. And in this pathway, the population growth stabilizes, as well as urban growth, and there's less expansion of urbanization in the Arctic areas. Next, we have human development, where there's a reduction and prevention of fires caused by tourism, because people are more aware of how to behave, for instance, in wooded areas, so accidents are less prone to happen. There's also more emphasis on green energy, and there are precautions in place for fire-prone areas. The third category that we have is, of course, very important. It's the fire suppression management category, and here we see that there's more prescribed and cultural burning in the pathway with high attack rates on wildfires. And there are also the risks related to wildlife-urban interface, which is the transition area or zone between wilderness and land development by human activity. Also, the risks here are decreased in that interface. And finally, we have here the fourth category is policies and incentives. And here, as an example, you can see that the agricultural burning is actually decreasing. And also the incentives that are in place to burn are actually well managed and monitored by the responsible bodies. Next, we have the Let It Burn pathway, which is the highest fire activity and fire risk pathway. And in this pathway, there is a high number of fires in the boreal with potentially large burned areas compared to other pathways. And in this pathway, fire activity and risk in the Arctic region also increases due to limitations to control fire-prone human activities such as tourism, timber, and fossil fuel extraction, for instance. Further, there's also a low attack rate on wildfires and less emphasis on reduction of fire risk from prescribed fire and cultural burning. The same categories also apply here. So first, when it comes to demographics, we see that there's a population growth in fire-prone areas in the pathway, and the wildland-urban interface risks are actually increasing. With human development, we see increased tourism with limited guidance that creates more risks of ignition in the area. There's less emphasis on green energy and more fuel extraction in fire-prone areas, which also links to biomass fuel extraction, for instance, from forests, and limited fuel treatments as well. With fire suppression and management, we see a limited prescribed and cultural burning with low attack rates on wildfires, as well as there's very limited funding for fire prevention and fighting from the policy side. And then in the policies and incentives category, we see that agricultural burning is uncontrolled, and the fire policy mechanisms in place are not functional. Then we move on to the fire will come, or the individual best guess pathway. And here we have, as I mentioned, we have developed the pathways for each of the Arctic Council member states plus Russia. And here you can see our 2 extreme pathways that I just introduced. So we got this and Let It Burn. And here you can also see where each country is in relation to the 2 extreme pathways. But let's take a look at these in a bit more in detail per country. And here, first I will present the pathways for top 3 countries expecting least fire, but not zero fire. First, we have Iceland with forest areas that are sparse, but there has actually been reforesting efforts lately, plus there's a peatland fire risk that exists. Iceland also has a lot of tourists, which increases the risk of ignition in the area. Next, we have Norway, where the current fire regime is low and fires are not expected to increase heavily, albeit the risk of accidental ignition by tourists and increase of lightning in the future is increased due to climate change. And thirdly, we have Greenland here, which is a novel fire regime in the area. And this regime might require new innovative policy and management approaches to contain and reduce wildfire risk. And also here, as human ignition sources are the main source currently in Greenland, activities like tourism and mining actually increase the risk in the future as well. And then from the other end of the spectrum, here are the countries expecting most fire in the best guess path, or the fire will come pathway. First, we have Russia. So there is a limited capability to respond to fires in the remote and extremely low populated Arctic Russia, as well as in Boreal Siberia and Far East. And this limited capability will continue, and thus wildland fires will be permitted to burn without intervention. And due to climate change, wildfires may increase as fuels become drier and as there is an increase in lightning strikes. Next, we have Canada, where climate change will increase both extreme fire weather and flammable vegetation conditions, as hotter and drier spring and early summer weather will increase wildfire risks throughout the country. And of course, we've seen alarming examples of this already this year. And due to the geographical vastness of the country, the fire suppression and management remains to be highly challenging in Canada. And finally, we have United States, where climate change will increase both extreme fire weather and flammable vegetation conditions for Alaska and the northern contiguous US. And overall, in the United States, the fire risk and number of fire ignitions will remain high. Then I would also like to walk you through some of the factors from the best guess pathway, which are not quite the same as in We Got This and Let It Burn, but we have selected some of the main factors that influence fires in these regions and have estimated their development in relation to the 2 extreme pathways. And for instance, the Nordic countries are expected to needing to be adapting to lengthening fire season. There's handling of dry peat, timber management, and human-caused fires as well here. In North America, in addition to adapting to lengthening fire season, the main factors are extreme heat and increased tundra fires, as well as the need to adapt to increased lightning, and there are other risks with the wildland-urban interface. In Eurasia, on top of adapting to lengthening fire season, extreme heat and increased dry peat and tundra fires, as well as to adapting to increased lightning, we particularly see the lack of firefighting infrastructure that might bring challenges to that area. And finally, when it comes to Greenland, the novel fire regime, there are 2 main factors that we've identified, which are extreme heat and degraded permafrost related risks, and also as mentioned, the human-caused fires are high in that, or the risk of those are high in Greenland. So then I will actually land to our recommendations after introducing these pathways. So of course, we think that at the end goal is that we have emission scenarios up to 2050 as a geospatial data set. So this means to actually put the emissions on a map, or in other words, maybe include the locations of the fire. But we would like to emphasize in our work that to create these emission scenarios for the Arctic fires, both human activity and climate change impacts on fires need to be considered. So we need to be able to sort of combine the quantitative data that we have already with a bit more in-depth qualitative data. We know that this is a difficult task, and we've only sort of scratched the surface now, but the next step, for instance, could be to try to quantify some of these key factors that we presented. For instance, these could be like amount of relevant forest management policies, or how we are expecting the agricultural activities to extend to the north. And while the scope here is the Arctic and Boreal, we of course want to emphasize that this is a global problem, and other regions need similar attention as well so that we can achieve a set of global fire emission scenarios. And a final advertisement to our technical report, Arctic Fires and Present Estimates and Future Pathways, is hopefully to be published by the end of this year still. And the pathways and the monitoring and reporting section, of course, that I didn't talk about today are presented here in the report. So this was all I wanted to say. I guess we're a bit late, but more or less on time, I hope. So thank you all for listening. Yeah, we all hope you take a look at our report once it's published. So that's it for me. And yeah, thank you also on behalf of my colleagues, I dare to say.
Thank you very much, Anna. We are running a little bit late, but I will just boldly go a few minutes over. And there's at least one question here in the chat, and both me and Jessica can help with this. Anna, I think I will actually forward this maybe straight to Jessica. But the question is, what are specific conditions for Greenland fires?
Maybe Jessica is better. Sorry, Jessica. Over to you.
Thank you. Sure. So Greenland had two wildfires in 2017 and 2019, and they were fairly large, more than 250 hectares each, and with less than 100 kilometers to the western edge of the Greenland ice sheet. In both cases, these fires were started in areas that are used for tourism. They were started around the same time of year, pardon me, in July. And they happened during extremely hot and dry summers. Both fires were started by humans. The second one being well documented along the famous Arctic Circle Trail, a well-known international tourism spot. And in both cases, it was the same type of fuels, so mainly tussocks and grasses and some low shrubs like wild blueberries. And then, of course, high carbon soils. I have heard folks call it peat. I think this is a little still controversial, as peat maps can be difficult to verify in parts of Greenland, though, of course, peat does exist there. So we'll say high carbon soils because we don't know the depth of those soils. And in both cases, these fires burned for almost a month. So there was a difficulty in responding to it because of their remoteness. The reason we would call this a new novel fire regime is that in the past, well, Greenland, of course, has had fires. They tended to be very small, isolated fires that were contained near either seasonal human settlements or permanent human settlements, whereas these really did escape into the landscape. And so it is it's something that really harkens back to what Ed has said and what Jan said about changing landscapes. There's a climate change that's led to a changing landscape in this, high Arctic region, and so the fire regime will be unique in some ways, as Greenland has a very unique ecology, landscape, climatology, and of course, human and cultural past and present. And so it will mean that those of us who are trying to work with the Greenlandic people, with the Danish, will need to take that into consideration. And it will share some characteristics, as I think Anna showed, with both North America and the Nordic countries, because of its unique location. So that's part of it. I think that's probably probably enough. We would be very excited, and I know in the AMAP working groups, while we have several Danish colleagues who do contribute more to climate, air quality, and smoke impacts on the cryosphere, we have actively tried to recruit anyone who is working in Greenland on these fires, and are hoping to have that type of cooperation in the future.
Thank you, Jessica. And with that, we are out of time.